And coming up on this week's Green Signals, the Jacobite steam train, we ask the ORR's Chief Inspector about the ongoing central door locking saga. The RAIB answers your questions about the Flying Scotsman crash report from the Strathspey incident. And we talk about an episode of BBC's Panorama on HS2 which left the Green Signals team utterly appalled. Welcome once again to Green Signals from me, Nigel Harris, and
from me, Richard Bowker.
Our weekly train chat, Richard, the highlight of my week. I need to get out more, don't I? And let's get straight into it. This week, we've got an exclusive interview with the very clear and very candid recently appointed ORR Chief Inspector of Railways, Richard Hines, who took over from Ian Prosser, CBE, after 16 years. Richard was extremely impressive and didn't try to dodge any question in the slightest, including, as you'd expect from us, questions on Mark 1s, central door locking, and all sorts of other things, including Euston. And it's important to remember that this interview with Richard was recorded before the events at Euston of Sunday, September 22nd. And we'll be coming back to all that. So let's see what Richard had to say. But before we do, it's important for me to stress that this is just a selection from the topical and interesting things that Richard had to say in his interview, which will be available in full on our usual channels. And we are delighted to welcome to Green Signals Richard Hines, the newly appointed Director of Rail Safety at ORR, and of course the 26th HM Chief Inspector of Railways in the Inspectorate's 183-year-old history. Richard, one question which journalists frequently ask, which I deplore, is an exception for me here. I don't like the how do you feel question. But given that your job was suggested and the job description in many ways written by George Stephenson, the father of railways, how does that feel to that incredible weight of history standing behind you and in support of you and actually putting expectations on you? Do you sense that at all? Are you aware of it?
Yeah, thanks very much, Nigel. And first to say thank you for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to be with you. I think the history of this role is really clear. You've described the kind of heritage of that. And of course, I take over from Ian Prosser, who I'm really grateful to and have had the pleasure of working alongside for the last sort of 3.5 years. But I think my overwhelming sense is that of responsibility. This is a very serious role. It has a huge responsibility for the industry. And I think it's pivotal in that there is only one chief inspector, and very often the industry will look to that individual in this role to help shape, where the industry is going, to constructively challenge. And I think to be part of the industry and to help move us forward collectively.
Do you come to this role then with a sort of a personal vision around safety and I suppose really what you would like to see done over your tenure, however long that is? Do you have a sort of a vision for safety on the railways?
So I'm 3 months into the role, Richard and Nigel. I'm still, if I'm honest, I'm finding my way. I'm still meeting colleagues. I'm still engaging with stakeholders. I'm still forming my views. But I think the vision that we already have here around zero industry cause fatalities, ever decreasing other incidents, improvements in risk controls, increasing maturity, I think is as good as the day as it was written. It's difficult to argue against that vision. So my approach would be one of kind of evolution, not revolution. So what I'm looking to do is to build upon the really strong platform that Ian and the team have built over his last 16 years and way beyond that. I do, however, think there are some things that the industry can do to improve and should focus on, and I'll be refreshing that vision, I suppose, is the right term, over the coming months. There's something about timeliness in my mind, about being a bit pacier with implementing change and recommendations, and maybe the adoption of technology, although that can be challenging. I also think there needs to be, a greater focus on health. So we talked a lot about safety in the past, but I think health is important. It's not as visible, it's not always as obvious, but it can lead to some really debilitating long-term diseases and experiences for individuals that are really unpleasant and unacceptable. And the other thing I would say is just really important to do the basics right every day. So get it right first time, every time, and that's what my focus will be on.
Some would say that health and safety on the railway, there's an element of balance, right? Because, obviously the principle of as low as reasonably practicable, ALARP, is not the same as absolute. And do you think then that there is an issue of balance between good safety, and safety by design, but also being able to deliver things in a value for money way? And how do you sort of manage that kind of conundrum, really?
Yeah, and I think this is a difficult challenge. And look, there's work to be done in both the safety space and the performance space, which is what I think you're referring to. But for me, performance and safety go hand in hand together. So very often a safe, healthy railway is the one that's performing at its absolute best and delivering for passengers and everybody that uses it. And that kind of analogy, I think, is something that I've seen in other sectors that I've worked and certainly regulated. That rings true. I think ORR as a sort of combined regulator adds real value in this space. And this is a difficult balance, Richard and Nigel, to strike. But the requirements of the law are really clear. That's the starting position. Companies have to do, and you've used the term, what is reasonably practicable. And that is a balance in terms of the degree of risk control that something offers versus the time, the cost, the effort in doing it. So it's not everything at all costs, and there needs to be that balance struck. And I think we've got, some good examples of where we've actively sort of engaged with industry, where we've, worked through situations where there have been proposals put forward that are above and beyond what's reasonably practicable, and we've tried to support and assist in that space.
This comment that you made in your Chief Inspector's review from the recent report, Annual Report on Health, Safety, Britain's Railways 23 to 24, you said when talking about rail reform, quote, "Reform may require enormous change. Change presents many opportunities, but also significant threats to effective health and safety management. There are many instances where ineffective change management processes at every level across every part of our industry have been highlighted as a causal factor in major incidents. Poor change and project management also risk the inefficiency and performance of the rail system." They're salutary words indeed, and we are seemingly on the brink of very significant change once again. So how concerned are you about the hopefully imminent transition to Great British Railways to GBR? And what role will HMRI play under your stewardship in ensuring that no one takes their eyes off the ball?
Yeah, and I think that's really important that you mentioned there, Nigel. So, reform does present lots of opportunities. I think it's fair to reflect that there is energy in the industry. People I speak to are actively looking forward to the opportunity to make things better for everyone that uses the system. But our role in a health and safety context will be to make sure that the new arrangements, do reflect best practice, do have features built into them that don't replicate the things that have perhaps gone wrong in the past. But, be really clear about it. My role, whatever the duration of the reform process, will be to make sure that there's a safe railway delivered every single day without fail. And it's going to be really important to make sure that people that deliver safety critical roles, that are in positions making decisions about safety, health, other matters, have their eyes firmly focused on what's happening today out on the network.
I wonder if we could just move to talk about a couple of, if I call them newsworthy things. We're not interested in individual people or actors. We're actually interested in principles and process here. But they have quite big implications, I think. One of them, I don't think you'll be surprised, because it goes back to your point about heritage earlier in a way, are Mark 1 vehicles on the network and the regulations that were put in place in 99, I think, and in particular, obviously there's the structural stuff, but also there's central door locking and the requirements to have that. Now, you won, if I can use that word, a quite significant defence of a judicial review around one particular operator who was challenging the CDL stuff in particular, and you revoked the exemption as a result of that. Now, we understand that they then put in another exemption application, which they're obviously entitled to do. And we also understand, because the RR kindly told us, I think back in June, that a decision had been made on that and communicated to the operator, and they'd been given a chance to sort of comment on that. But that was in June. I mean, this is quite a matter of, I suppose, public interest, really.
Oh, yes.
Where are we in that process? Because it feels 3 months seems an awful long time for chatting about a decision you've taken. When are we going to hear? When will it be made public what that decision is?
Yeah, so I think you've reflected, Richard, the history with this issue and the judicial review outcome, and the fact that we are actively working on a further application from the company. And as you say, that's entirely their prerogative. We're a fair, proportionate, I think actually quite open regulator, so we have to, preside over that as we would for any other operator, actually, not just West Coast Railways. As you'd expect with this type of issue, it's particularly complex. But I think the expectations are really clear. I think our policy sets out very firmly where we are on that, and the judicial review outcome reinforces that. We are, in the process, we are engaging with the company. We've had meetings recently with them, and I would suggest we're approaching the sort of later stages of that assessment. But that's a matter between us and the company. It would be sort of unfair for me to give any more on that at this particular time. But rest assured, when that outcome is known, we will communicate that.
No, that's helpful. I wonder if I can just ask one supplementary on that, though, because this is what's happening today. So we know that there's a service running. It's the Jacobite service. And currently it has Mark 1s and Mark 2s, we believe, sort of interspersed within a rake of coaches. But they're Mark 1s that don't have an exemption, obviously, and they don't have CDL. So how, in that situation, they must be relying on something else, right, in order to be able to do that. How, in situations like that, does the HMRI get itself comfortable that that's okay, and that the conditions of the regulations that are being relied upon to run that rake of coaches in the way it is are also compliant?
Yeah, so I think the ongoing safety of that operation, and actually any other on the railway, is a priority for me and my team. But by using the Mark II stock that they are complying with the requirements of the law. The sort of carriages that fare-paying members of the public are using do have central door locking. If those members of the public were to be in Mark I coaches that didn't have that, they of course would be in breach of the regulations. But we have, very regular engagement with the company. We've taken sort of steps to gain assurance around the fact that they've got the controls in place. But ultimately, this is the company's risk to manage. Our job is to test, to challenge, to make sure that that's being done, and then to conclude, the application process that you've just referred to.
Another live issue, if we may. Euston Station. It's been in the news very much recently, of course, but steering well clear of the claims and counterclaims made by any of the individuals involved. Can we talk instead about the process? Last September, ORR issued an improvement notice which had to be complied with by the end of December by Network Rail. Could you just walk us briefly through the process of how the duty holder complies with such an improvement notice, and how then you assess what they've done and their compliance, and once they have deemed to be in compliance, what that then says about how safe the asset is to remain in service?
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Nigel. And I use Euston regularly and recognise that it's a busy London terminal. It has a huge number of passengers flowing through it. But I suppose the start of this sort of issue arose when we received a number of complaints regarding, surging and crowd control effectively at the station. And that led to an inspection that was conducted. And we found, gaps in the arrangements of Network Rail as the station manager at that facility that didn't meet the requirements of the law. The improvement notice, which is a time-bound piece of action that requires them to do certain things within a specified period of time, essentially said they needed to review their arrangements to make sure they reflected the actual circumstances at the station, and then to make sure that there was monitoring arrangements in place to ensure that they remain fit for purpose after they'd implemented them. We carried out a follow-up inspection at the station. We've had regular liaison with Network Rail, and the inspector formed the opinion that they'd met the requirements of the notice. They'd done what was required of them. Clearly, it's a dynamic environment at Euston. There is inevitably going to need to be a period of kind of fine-tuning, I would say. And of course, this is not just a Network Rail problem at the station, it's a whole system issue. We rely also on train operating companies who need to be part of the solution. And that, I think, is where Network Rail have focused their attention. But from our perspective, they have met the requirements of the notice, but we continue to have, dialogue with them as you'd expect.
Is it possible for you to shine a bit of a light on what you asked for and what changed? For example, do you now regard that there's fewer stampedes?
So the requirements of the notice were broadly for them to review their risk assessment, to review their arrangements, and to make changes in relation to it. And I'd say there's a clear difference between a busy station, which I think it's always going to be, but those situations where there is surging, for example, or as you've referred to, I think stampedes, Nigel, that clearly is a situation that could give rise to risk. And that, I think, is where the effort needed to be focused by Network Rail. But from my understanding, they've taken steps proactively to, one, deal with the notice, but also, two, in terms of its implementation, to make sure that they have, a better understanding and a greater degree of control in terms of what's happening on the platform on a daily basis.
Did you, you said you use it, did you notice any changes personally?
So I used it off peak, I think, the last time I used it. So it was significantly quieter than it perhaps is in the morning or the evening. But the duty is on Network Rail to manage that asset and that infrastructure. It's a dynamic environment, but we're satisfied they've got arrangements in place that met the requirements of the notice. And now it's about making sure that they're properly implemented and there's a regular review of them to make sure they remain fit for purpose.
It is an incredible. So, Richard, what did you think of that?
He's good, wasn't he?
Very.
He was really clear. And, obviously, because we actually spent quite a lot of time talking to him on lots of issues, we've put the full interview out as a separate video, and you can listen to loads of other stuff, including his background and how he got involved and his vision and so on and so forth. Really good stuff. I thought he was very good, very straightforward. And I think but as you said before we heard that piece, Nigel, that was recorded before the incident that took place at Euston on Sunday the 22nd. Now, for those who aren't aware, there was almost like a bit of a perfect storm, really, of crowding issues, but also some serious issues with Avanti West Coast services and cancellations and some trains not running and so on. And the images of it and the comments made are really concerning.
Very much so.
And I don't know if you kind of, what your take on this is, but for me, it's not just about the station. It's about how the whole system works. So, if the train service isn't working properly, then you're going to have problems at the station and vice versa. So it feels to me like it's a whole systems issue. But looking at those images, someone's going to have to get a grip of it fairly soon, because that was not just unpleasant, and it does need to be addressed.
The images are appalling, and and I'm sure it was very unpleasant, and I would have hated it myself. Tick, tick, tick. Although some of the comments were a bit over the top, I felt. But of course, they're meat and drink for the Daily Mail and the TV news bulletins, aren't they?
Yes, I suppose so. But if you are a passenger using that, where does perception and reality diverge? I suppose if you feel something
it's a reality,
is bad, then it really kind of doesn't matter, does it? Because it's what you feel it to be. I just look. It is. Nobody thinks that station is what we need. It needs, but that was a concern. But look, as to Richard, I thought he was balanced, measured, clear. And it sounds to me like he's, Ian Prosser was Ian Prosser, and a fantastic guy, did an amazing amount, but he sounds to me like, a worthy chief inspector.
Very much so. I suppose re-listening to the interview might have got this wrong, but I don't recall him once giving an error or a hesitation. He'd be brilliant on Just a Minute. He just talked with great fluency and very articulately and great expertise about anything we asked him.
Yeah. No.
And he said he'd come back, so we'll get another go. He
did. Anyway, shall we move on to another subject that's kind of been in the news recently?
Oh, yeah.
And it relates to the recent publication of the Two Mayors report, as it's being called, but I mean, I suppose more prosaically, the Midlands Northwest Rail Link report.
Snappy acronym there.
It is a bit. I quite like the two mayors report. I think we know what that means. Now, this report's the one that summarises the study that's been chaired by Sir David Higgins and led by Arup and a pretty serious team of people into the options for constructing a new line between Birmingham and Manchester in the aftermath of Rishi Sunak's cancellation last year of HS2 Phase 2. Now, as we reported on Green Signals last week, the report's been widely welcomed.
It was. It landed very well, didn't it?
It did. And in fact, so much so that there has been some suggestion that the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, is potentially supportive of it.
Which would be good, mind you, in the same week that there's a hint that Rachel Reeves isn't quite supportive of Euston. But it did attract inevitable reaction from the anti-anything that might look remotely like HS2 Brigade, including some highly misleading comments, in my view, from one particularly well-known critic of the project. So, Richard spoke to William Barter, a very experienced train planner, amongst many other things, and who has deep knowledge of HS2 timetable planning and the West Coast Main Line to really sort the story out and get it straight. Here's what Richard and William talked about.
William, welcome once again to Green Signals. Great to have you back on the show. I wanted to ask you a very specific question, really about a very specific thing. We've had the two mayors report, let's call it that, the alternative to HS2, which looks remarkably like elements of HS2, and it's probably good for all of that. But no sooner had that report been published than a guy called Andrew Gilligan, who is sort of a head of infrastructure, I think, at a think tank called Policy Exchange, who was heavily involved, we understand, in advising the previous Prime Minister Rishi Sunak on HS2. We assume that because he describes himself in his Twitter bio as advisor to two prime ministers. He made a tweet. I'm just going to read it to you, although I know you know what's coming. He said, the report, the two mayors report, is dishonest in many ways. It claims a capacity crisis on the West Coast Main Line because beyond Birmingham, the West Coast Main Line infrastructure is only able to accommodate 200-metre trains. And he goes, not true. The plan always was to run 400-metre trains on the classic line, both to Manchester and Scotland. And he adds, and the new platforms, which would allow 400-metre trains to serve Manchester, survived the cancellation of the northern leg. And a lot of people, including you, have said, that is not correct. Why is that not correct?
Well, where the Prime Minister's October decision left us was with Phase 1A to Handsacre still under construction, going ahead, and powers reserved to build the approach to Manchester for Northern Powerhouse Rail. And that approach involves the tunnel from Manchester Airport to Manchester Piccadilly and a new station at Manchester Piccadilly, where in the bill, indeed, there would be 400-metre platforms. The flaw in what Mr. Gilligan is saying is that to connect HS2 Phase 1 to those 400-metre platforms, there aren't any rails. And there certainly has never been a plan to run 400-metre trains to Manchester via the West Coast Main Line. Scotland, yes, from Goulburn and northwards. Manchester, no,
without
never.
HS2 Phase 2.
Exactly.
So I suppose if we're being charitable and fair and balanced, because we always like to be that on Green Signals, give people the benefit of the doubt, you could argue that all that Andrew Gilligan is saying is, well, look, the 400-metre platforms in Manchester, look, there is still a provision there. That was the plan because of the Northern Powerhouse Rail thing. But as you say, where it falls down is, yes, but only if you can actually get the trains physically there, and you can't. Why could you not then say, run to Handsacre and the field near Lichfield, run then up the existing West Coast Main Line to probably, I guess, somewhere around in the Warrington area where NPR, Northern Powerhouse Rail, must intersect somewhere near the West Coast Main Line there, and then run them on NPR into Manchester and your 400-metre platforms that way. Why is that not possible?
Well, it certainly isn't by any definition current plans. Now, that doesn't mean someone couldn't draw up a plan to do it, but the first thing is you would have to run all 3 London to Manchester trains per hour and anything from Birmingham through that Shugborough bottleneck that we've talked about extensively. But it gets worse than that. In order to get to Warrington, where the Manchester trains, the London-Manchester trains don't go at all now, you'd have to pass through the Winsford to Weaver double-track section. Adding 3 trains per hour there could only come at the expense of other more local or regional services. And even if you do that, well, you've gone north to Warrington only to swing south to use the route through Manchester Airport. How long's that going to take? Your journey times are going to be ludicrous by the time you've done all that.
So, I mean, just to summarise that then, really, even if you can argue that there is still a plan to have 400-metre platforms in Manchester, which actually my understanding is for NPR in isolation, arguably you don't need anything that big anyway. But let's say you're going to have 400-metre platforms in Manchester. Practically, and in terms of current plans, there is no way of connecting everything so that 400-metre long trains can run on phase 1, then on the classic network, and actually get to this new station. It just does not work.
Yes, that's certainly not in current plans, and if anyone wanted to draw up a plan to do it, I don't think they'd like the answer very much.
William, thank you very much indeed for that. That's incredibly clear and appreciated. Cheers.
Okay, thank you very much.
Now, as regular viewers and observers of this project will know, Gilligan is known for his opposition to HS2. Policy Exchange wrote an excoriating report in November 2022, HS2, the kindest cut of all, which has him listed as its author, and it has long been assumed that he was involved in the advice to Rishi Sunak that led to cancellation of HS2 Phase 2 in October 2023. So, Richard, are William and you saying that you can't see how on current plans Andrew Gilligan's statement is in any way practically possible?
So the statement that we're still going to take 400-metre trains to Manchester. Well, you said something really important there, on current plans. So on current plans, and to the best of our knowledge, no, can't see how that works. You could argue that the NPR bill, which was the Phase 2B bill, that's through to Manchester, repurposed exactly, could include the 400-metre platforms that were planned for Piccadilly under Phase 2B.
Theoretically, that is, yeah.
In a station, a Piccadilly station for HS2 that was to the east of the current Manchester Piccadilly station, okay? Which is where HS2 trains were going to go. So in theory, yeah, you could put a 400-metre platform there. However, we can't see how you can get HS2 400-metre trains to that station, right? Because if Northern Powerhouse Rail is built, then you could potentially envisage a connection between the West Coast Main Line and NPR, probably somewhere around Warrington, right? But that's a bonkers way.
I was going to say that would be an insane route, wouldn't it?
Well, it's like going north to come back south again. It's crazy. And of course, the problems of the Trent Valley, our favourite section from Handsacre through Colwich to Stef, and so that's still in play as a problem.
You'd still have to thread that needle. You've
got to thread that needle. And now, if you're going up to Warrington, you've got the problems around Weaver Junction, which is also the next sort of bottleneck, right? Where you've got Crewe in the middle as well. So it just doesn't work. And I suppose if anybody's thinking, that's okay, what you can do is you can run these 400-metre HS2 trains, because don't forget, 200-metre HS2 trains doesn't work because you end up with fewer seats.
Fewer seats and
than
slower
we've got
speeds.
now, right?
Yeah.
So that's really key. So 400-metre trains going up the existing line, whether it's via Crewe Wilmslow to Stockport or via, did I say Stockport? Stockport, or via, or via Stoke-on-Trent to Cheadle-Hulme and to Stockport, whichever way you go, you can't, I mean, it just doesn't work. I haven't even sat down with a map to work out how much a 400-metre train fouls both end of Stockport station, but it'll be significant. It's half the train's going to be off the platform somewhere. It just doesn't work. It's not been thought through.
So in sum, by some quirk, the 400-metre platform survives in the former HS2 build, now repurposed for MPR. But even if you built them, you could only get them there by a route which nobody in the right mind would consider using and would not be possible. So the statement is just not true.
Yeah, it's practically not deliverable. Yeah, so absolutely.
So presumably this wonderful quality advice was present in the BBC Panorama. HS2, the railway that blew billions, that actually featured one Andrew Gilligan.
It did. It featured quite a lot of people, but Andrew Gilligan was in that programme, yes. On the BBC Panorama programme, if anybody's not watched it, you should watch it, because even if you end up watching things you don't really like or agree with, I just think that enriches your knowledge and your kind of
that's one way
awareness
of putting it. It will leave you wanting to throw things at the telly, I have to say.
Well, yeah, but if you start from a certain point of view, that's fair. But you won't learn anything that's not already been aired. It kind of puts it all together in one package, but it's not balanced. It doesn't really talk about why we were doing HS2. It just focuses about a couple of very specific things that went wrong. Capacity only gets a very limited mention. Jim Steer talks about it, the former train planner, used to work with me at the SRA. Andy Burnham talks about capacity in the programme, but that's pretty much it. Andrew Gilligan makes a typically robust contribution. He says he makes statements like HS2 is extremely stupid, and he does it in a way with a tone that suggests that if you think otherwise, then it's you that's extremely stupid. And I find that rather frustrating, actually, that sort of style.
The words, in my opinion, are missing.
No, quite. No, they're just sort of statements of truth, but it's his truth, not necessarily anybody else's. So the programme spends the vast amount of its time focusing on the how, not the why, right? Which is a bit of a missed opportunity. One little point I was going to make. I know your favourite subject is numbers, right? I know.
God, here we go.
Well, no, I think this is just quite important bit of context, right? See what you think of this, right? So the programme focuses very much on the fact that the property acquisition costs grew from 2.8 billion to 4.8 billion, so an increase of 2 billion, and it focuses on the processes that went on around that. Now, I am not saying that the way HS2 managed it was correct. I don't have the detail, right? But I just want to put that 2 billion in context, okay? The value of the British economy, annual GDP, gross domestic product, in the UK in 2023 was 2.27 trillion pounds, okay? Just to explain that is 2.27 times 10 to the power 12. It's a very, very big number. Yeah, no. What does that mean? Well, per day, if you divide that number by 365 per day, it is 6.2 billion pounds a day. Per hour, it's 259 million pounds. So that 2 billion, the property acquisition cost was just under 8 hours worth of the UK's economic output. Why do I make that point? Because although I'm not suggesting that we were wise he should ever waste anything, 2 billion pounds was 8 hours worth of UK GDP on an asset that will carry on creating wealth and economic growth for 100 years.
I'm in awe of your maths as ever, Richard. Especially as you seem to have a calculator that works in trillions. I can't get my head around that at all. Just that one.
I had to turn my iPhone the other way around so the numbers were...
But you see, that's where journalism fails hugely at the moment across the piece, is people are not given that kind of context. The minute they hear the word billion, they think, oh, it's a vast amount of money, it's got to be a waste of money. You know, journalism's job is to give people context and a breadth of understanding so they can absorb and really interpret numbers like that. And apart from green signals, there's very few people doing it. It needs a few more journalists to turn their iPhones on the other way.
Turn their iPhones around so they can put really big numbers. No, I agree. Now, there is a little bit. I mean, I'm being slightly naughty with that. But the context, I think, is important, right? Final thing on the BBC Panorama programme. If I were the DFT, I'd be mighty relieved.
Oh, God, yes.
Because at virtually no point did it say, hang on a minute, who was the sponsor and the client for this? With oversight at a day-to-day level to set the program. Didn't talk about chopping and changing specifications, didn't talk about the hundreds of people that have been involved in the government on this project. I think they probably went, mopped their brows and went, whew.
No talk of that making contractors take 30-year risk on the assets, which jacked up the prices. None of that. And I know from the time when the antis were making great hay about this, it's only a few minutes faster to Birmingham, that people within HS2 who wanted to get out there and set the record straight on capacity were told to just shut up by the DFT.
Well, there you go. So, no, in summary, you can't get a 400-metre train to Manchester Piccadilly using current plans that we are aware of.
Full stop, QED, the end.
Yeah.
All right, jolly good. I'm sure that'll prompt some comment, Richard, and well done on the maths.
I hope so.
And I'm just putting on one inside my head, that tip to turn my iPhone sideways to get bigger numbers. Okay, last week we talked a bit more about the collision of Flying Scotsman at the Strathspey Railway with a set of coaches in September 2023 and the subsequent RAIB report into the incident. Viewers and listeners will remember that we said we'd put some questions to RAIB and we're hoping for a response. Well done, RAIB. We did do that, and we put all your comments to them, and they responded. Richard grouped them into three sections, which were whether there was ambiguity of roles in the cab, 2, whether there was distraction risk from having more than 4 people on the footplate, and 3, whether a shunter, someone watching assisting from the platform at the end of the carriages, would have helped prevent the collision. And that last question accounted for the vast majority of your comments. Everybody seemed to think there should be a shunter on the ground. Well, RAIB, to their credit, were excellent. They responded to us in some detail. Did they not, Richard?
They did, actually. And we'll go through each. I mean, they mainly focus their comments on the ambiguity of roles and then the point you've just made about the shunter. But let's just go through them. I mean, on that first point, ambiguity of role in the cab, they said this. They said, we would like to refer your listeners back to paragraphs 84 to 88 of the report. That's the RAIB report, where we examine the perception created by the position and actions of the custodian's representative. Okay. And quote, this is from the report, the location and actions of the custodian's representative created a perception among others in the cab that the custodian's representative was looking out and providing direction to the driver when they were not doing so, i.e. everybody thought they were, but they weren't. Now, one Green Signals listener question in this area related to aircraft, what's called CRM or crew resource management being in place in the aviation sector to deal with this. And it makes clear who's in charge on a flight deck, even if, as was the case with Flying Scotsman, someone more senior in the organisation was also present. And the RAIB said, as your listener points out, the concept of crew resource management has its roots in the aviation industry, but similar concepts are equally applicable to the rail industry. And it said, RAIB is not permitted by law to apportion blame or liability. On a broader level, simply blaming one person for their action or inaction isn't useful in preventing future accidents. We need to understand the conditions in which people took certain actions and see if improvements can be made, which will reduce the chance of a similar accident happening again. So they're making the point, they're not there to apportion blame, but they are there to say, on that day, in those circumstances, this is what we think the ambiguity of roles in the cab could have been, was a causal factor that could have had led to the incident taking place.
On just quickly on that point about the assumption that the owner's rep in the fireman's seat was looking out and for the driver when he wasn't. It wasn't an unreasonable assumption. If you look at all the videos of that incident, he is in the seat with his head out the window looking back towards the train, but that word assume. Now, RAIB didn't comment specifically on the question of the number of people on the footplate, but they did comment on the many questions you raised about a shunter or having someone on the ground platform to assist. And they said, quote, lots of your listeners have commented on the lack of provision of a person on the ground coordinating the movement, referred to variously as a shunter, a banksman. And this clearly struck a chord. While it is right to say that a person in a place of safety with a good view of the track and the coaches and clear communications with the driver would probably have prevented this accident, RAIB's task is to investigate the circumstances in which the accident happened and the arrangements which were in place at the time. As the report states, the process adopted on the day of the accident had been used before, and the intention was to stop short of the coaches before undertaking the coupling operation. However, there was ambiguity in the roles in the cab and an assumption that the custodians representing was acting as lookout, and the coaches were positioned further south than the driver expected. The railway involved may, of course, choose to change how they manage such movements in response to RAIB's recommendation and or their own findings. It's very interesting that RAIB agree that a person in a place of safety with a good view of the track and the coaches and clear communications with the driver would probably have prevented this accident, and I would add, and a clear plan agreed in advance between those two people. The only other thing I'd say is, Rich, is I repeat what I said last week. 6 people in the cab, whether they do anything, move or say anything, is a distraction in its own right. You are worried about their safety, their welfare, especially when you're about to buffer onto a set of carriages and there may be a jolt. So they are always a distraction.
Yeah. No, you've been very clear about that. And actually, a lot of people, subsequent to sending those questions to RIB, a lot of green signalers listeners kind of made exactly that point, in support of that. But isn't it interesting, Nigel, that they've said there that the RIB do agree that a person in a place of safety with a good view of the track and the coaches and clear communications, the driver could probably have prevented
the accident.
That's very interesting. So for all of those who wrote in, actually the RIB agree with you. The other good news is the RAIB's Deputy Chief Inspector has said they would be delighted to come onto green signals in the near future. Yeah, it's terrific. And chat about the role of the RAIB in this and the investigations that they carry out. So I've got to say, well done to the RAIB for being proactive about that. And we're looking forward to that discussion. I think it'll be a very interesting chat.
Well, indeed, because there's things to talk about, like they talk about blame, and I say that it's not talking about blame, it's looking for the real reasons why something happened. And I sometimes think they hold back from doing that for, say, fear of being thought they're blaming them, and there's an issue there. Anyway, we can talk about that, can't we? When they come on.
Indeed.
Okay, now time finally to thank everyone who has left us a super thanks on YouTube this week, and they are Bob Walsh, Paul Roberts, the Independent Brigline Rail Group, Chris Exley, Ian Munday, deep breath, Locomotion Lotion, and Alan Kirkman. We do appreciate so many of you leaving us super thanks, so thank you very much indeed from all three of us.
Hear, hear. And thanks also to our new gold and silver members, who are Firefly 4000, Eric Cockerill, Peter Scutt, AWS Moto, Max Eves, The Silk Moth, Stephen Menzies, David Hudson, Alfie, Lee Yarker, and Kevin Langham. And you can see all our members, to whom we are very grateful, in the end credits of the show. Now, if you're not already a member, there's a link to find out more in the description box, or just click join if you're watching on YouTube. We are, as we promised, adding some really, well, we think it's really good exclusive videos to the members only. Commenter put a Great Western cab ride up last week, which a lot of people watched over the weekend and clearly really enjoyed. So there's all sorts of stuff to watch and coming as well in the near future. And we let you in on the behind the scenes on what we're working on as well. So it's really worth watching if you and joining if you like what we do.
I really enjoyed your camp trip, Richard. It was good stuff. I don't know that railway at all, so all the little captions saying where we were and other little notes were really good. More of that, please. More jollies for you, Richard.
Indeed. Oh, well, I'm not going to say no to that.
Well, indeed so. Anyway, on to this week's news roundup.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, it's me. Oh, brilliant.
Is that what you call a pregnant pause?
No, that's called just blatant incompetence on my part, actually. I've got a little list here, and normally you do... Anyway, whatever. Right, let's carry on.
You assumed.
Thanks. I assumed, yeah. Thanks to Dave Harris for sending us this one. Now, this is interesting. This actually, Arriva Group has published proposals to the government to help fix Britain's railways. It's worth pointing out that Arriva is the only owning group, we think, that has experience with all the different types of contract currently in use on the railways. So they've got Grand Central, which obviously Chiltern Railways, Cross Country, and Arriva Rail London. So they do have a broad knowledge of not only the network, but how the different models work. Now, the idea behind the report is quotes, to kickstart immediate improvements. Here. Things like making more effective use of existing networks and train fleets and other assets, making timetabling more flexible and responsive, while empowering TOCs to make timetable decisions to deliver growth and also improving workforce skills. Now, we'll stick a link to the report if you want to have a read in the additional resources for the episode, and you can find that in our blog, which is on our website, which is greensignals.org. But I have to say, fair play. Whilst, private operators, may not necessarily be flavour of the month in the DFT in some respects, nonetheless, we've been calling for ages, haven't we, for, those with expertise and experience to say what they think. And there's no monopoly on the truth. So this is a good thing to have done. So, well, whatever you think of it, well done for doing it.
And I do, I do like those 4 words, kickstart immediate improvements.
Yeah,
that's you don't need a load of money, planning time, or anything else. Or some things you need to just JFDI and do a few things, don't you?
You like that, don't you?
I do. I'm a big fan of JFDI. Details of the celebrations we're likely to see during Railway 200 next year are now starting to emerge, and one of them caught not only our eye but many of yours too, and no surprises there. So thanks to John Lancaster for sending us a link to this one. Alstom is going to open its historic Derby Litchurch Lane factory, originally a carriage works, to the public for the first time to host an event it is calling The Greatest Gathering. It's planned to be the largest temporary assembly of rolling stock and rail-related exhibits in a generation over a 3-day event. Strikes me as a worthy successor to the cavalcades, which just aren't possible now. They promise to showcase iconic vehicles from the past, present and future of Britain's railways, offer rides along Derby's test track, which is actually quite long, and show a variety of miniature trains and model railway layouts. There's even going to be fairground attractions, refreshment areas and live music to create a real festival feel. More information and details on how to book tickets will be released in due course. Maybe we should be thinking about doing a live podcast from there, Richard, or record one there, because it all sounds very exciting.
Yeah, that does sound exciting. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
It'll be really good. It is true what you said, though. Those cavalcades, they were great, weren't they? It's a shame we can't do that again. But anyway.
Well, I guess they could, but they're just too much trouble.
Yeah, fair enough. Anyway, some new tactics in our next story. They're being used by Network Rail to tackle metal theft on the railway, which is actually a major problem. There were more than 100 incidents last year, costing around £4 million and causing thousands of delay minutes. Special trespass beads are being deployed, and these are little tiny pellets which are designed to break upon impact, and they contain select DNA, which can then be detected by trained sniffer dogs and seen by special police torches. And the solution that's in this select DNA stays on shoes and clothing for weeks or even months after a crime has been committed, enabling police to link criminals to the stolen items. So that sounds good.
So if they feel somebody's collar, they can shine black light on the boots or something and it all shows up. Well, that sounds good to me. Right, now I must thank Mike and Sean Morris Armitage for sending this one through because it's brilliant. Straight face time. A Great Western Railway rush hour service from Reading to Gatwick was cancelled after a pair of squirrels boarded the train and refused to leave. It's like a wind-up, isn't it? The unwanted rodents jumped on the train at Gomshall in Surrey. Pronunciation alert. Without tickets, I'm sure. Tut-tut. They apparently then proceeded to start attacking passengers, prompting them to flee onto the platform. Who, the squirrels or the passengers? The passengers.
It's not clear, is it? No.
The train continued to Red Hill. It's like from the Day Today with Alan Partridge, isn't it? The train continued to Red Hill, where staff spent half an hour attempting to lure the squirrels off the train, were they red or grey, using broomsticks, a telescopic grabber, and peanuts. Oh, God, you could have played the Benny Hill theme, couldn't you? It worked on one of the pair, but the other stubbornly refused to move, so the service was terminated and sent back to Reading. A spokesman for GWR had this to say: "We can confirm that the 0854 Reading to Gatwick was terminated at Red Hill after a couple of squirrels boarded the train at Gomshall without tickets, breaching railway bylaws. We attempted to remove them at Red Hill, but one refused to leave and was returned to Reading to bring an end to this nutty tale."
Oh, seriously. Oh, very good.
What a great story.
It's a great story, that, isn't it? We've got a little bit of news of our own, actually.
We have.
We are going to be live. We're very excited. We've been invited to do a live broadcast from the Railway Industry Association's annual conference on November the 7th. We'll reveal a bit more about what we're going to be doing there in the coming weeks. But in the meantime, we'll stick a link to find out more about the event and who we'll be sharing the stage with on our website. But it's going to be a live Green Signals podcast from the RIA conference.
It should be fun, shouldn't it? I'm looking forward to that.
Excellent.
Very exciting stuff. And that's the end of the news roundup for this week. If you'd like to send us any snippets of big stories, small stories that you feel we may not have heard about, and very often stuff does slip beneath our radar, don't hesitate to let us know. Can't promise to read them all, but where we do, we'll say who sent it and we'll name check. So there's your challenge. Tell us what's going on, because we need to know.
Indeed. And it's now time to do the quiz.
Oh,
right. Yeah. Right. Okay. So I'm glad you avoided a cheeky comment there and just sort of giggled. Anyway, last week's question was this. The world's first municipally owned motorbus service ran from what railway station? And the answer, as many of you knew,
of course,
was Eastbourne.
I didn't.
Where the first municipal bus services started in April 1903, running from Eastbourne railway station to Eastbourne's Old Town. I did actually say there was a family connection, and one listener knew what it was. It was quite extraordinary.
This is your dad, is it?
Yes. So my father, Roger Bowker, was general manager of Eastbourne buses, I think from sort of mid-80s to sort of the end of that decade, when he then moved to London Buses. So yes, so there you go. There's a family connection with Eastbourne Buses. And the winner is Chris Cook. So well done, Chris. If you send us an email to quiz@greensignals.org with an address, we'll send your mug to you. Now, Chris is an avid listener. I'm delighted he's won. It was completely random because Stef won't do it any other way. But Chris has submitted a few questions before.
I wondered if he was a guy who'd sent the questions.
Yeah. So I thought, in honour of the fact that Chris has won the competition this week, we'll this week's quiz question will be another Chris Cook one. So this is a good one. I like this. I think there might be more than one answer to this, but anyway, no doubt listeners will let us know. Where on the rail network, on the British rail network, are there 4 consecutive stations on a line which begin, each of them begins with the 4 consecutive letters of the alphabet, so A, B, C, D, obviously. And where are the 2 consecutive stations to these on the same line, if you're going in the direction of A, B, C, D, which then begin with the next 2 consecutive letters, E and F. So you need to work out 4 places which go A, B, C, D in order, and then where would E be and where would F be? If you think you know, usual rules, send us an email to quiz@greensignals.org by midday on, gosh, when is it? I've not worked midday. It must be the 28th. So midday on Saturday, the 28th of September. Put all the answers into a hat and draw one out next week.
The quiz always makes me feel really thick. First, because I have absolutely no clue as to most of the answers. And then I feel thick again when there's hundreds of them putting answers in within about 3 minutes of it going.
No, I completely agree. Yeah, but there you go.
Well, we'll see if Chris can catch him out, but somehow I suspect not, despite the deep knowledge of his and intricacy of his questions. Anyway, let's move on to the good news. And this is a really great update, and it's from north of the border. North of the border, I mean Northern England, of course. This is a great update on something we talked about a few episodes ago. The Keighley and Worth Valley Railway has completed its 1.25 million bridge replacement project on time at Haworth. Hooray. Replacing Bridge 27 just on the Oxenhope side of Haworth was the railway's biggest ever civil engineering project, closing the line from Haworth to Oxenhope for 19 days. I'm surprised it was so short a period, actually. But it was a huge success, and the line was able to reopen, as planned, on September 21st. So well done, the men and women of the Worth Valley Railway, for yet again pushing out the borders. They were one of, I think after the Middleton and the Bluebell, they were one of the first reopenings in 1968. And that's absolutely brilliant, I think. A voluntary and specialist contractor workforce spent 2,500 hours on the project, which involved a 450-ton capacity crane lifting the new bridge deck into place on September 14th. So applause all round. What a fantastic achievement.
Brilliant, and it just shows it can be done.
Absolutely.
Superb.
Absolutely. And here's a couple of Lancastrians piling praise on Yorkshire people, which deserved but difficult.
Has that sort of hurt a bit, has it?
Well, It did a bit, but not only a bit. They did a brilliant job on that.
Yeah,
I'm sure they all went up the hill in Haworth to the Fleece for several pints of Timothy Taylor's Landlord to celebrate.
Well, they earned it.
They did, absolutely. And sadly, that's all we've got time for again this week. But thanks so much for watching or listening. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel on YouTube. And if you really want to support us, find out about the membership levels you can join on YouTube or Patreon. But most importantly, join us again next week for this show, which will always be free. So until then, it's goodbye from me, and
it's goodbye from me.
Thanks a lot for your company. See you next week.